crazy. Okay, I'm gonna put that there. We're gonna hope that mic doesn't fall out of it. Can you guys hear me all right? Everyone hear me? I'm kind of having to talk a little loud, so I'm gonna talk a little quieter, like I normally would. If you didn't catch it, my name is Drew. I am going to be bringing the message tonight. And if you've been living under a rock, by the way, we are in a sermon series on identity and idolatry. Slide up behind me of a guy who's given some sort of side-eye look. We are so close to being done with this sermon series. We kind of, if you haven't noticed, been somewhat moving through Scripture chronologically. And so this week, we're going to be looking at Jesus and what does he have in store for us for this topic. And honestly, we've hopefully been pointing to Jesus this whole time and referencing a lot of stuff. But this week, we're going to spend a whole week diving into it. And if you were at Winter Retreat, you know Shrek gave an awesome talk on having Jesus as like the center of our identity and finding our identity with Jesus. So if you weren't there, go check it out. It's awesome. Honestly, probably better than I can do. It's super, super great. But we're going to be diving into it tonight. And I want to start by just having a little story time. So let's put this picture up, maybe the next one. So this is me, freshman year. You can decide if I had a glow up or a glow down. That's for you to kind of determine. When I was growing up, I heard this concept, I grew up in the church, I heard this concept, Jesus should be at the center of your life, and I was like, okay, cool. And then I came to college and I heard this concept of like Jesus, your identity should be rooted in Jesus. I'm like, okay, great. And I would like nod along and be like, I totally, yes, definitely Jesus should be, and he is the center of my identity, all that kind of stuff for sure. I would leave that conversation and be like, what does that actually even mean at all? Like, what does that mean? I'm like, how does that even work? How does that function? What is actually happening with that? It just feels like Christianese, like for saying I should just be really obsessed with Jesus or something. And I couldn't help but feel like I was missing out on what people were talking about when they were saying that. So I came to college. That's the I was gonna say man, but boy, that Darby fell in love with somehow. We started dating, got into focus, all that kind of stuff. And I started thinking through this a little bit more and thinking through identity and all of that. And so I want to show you some kind of drawings I've made of how I conceived of my identity for a while. So the first one is this. There we go. They should be there. No, just hit the next slide. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is my concept of identity when I came to college, right? So this is me, and in that, I thought I was pretty smart. I thought I was pretty nice. I kind of got into style a little bit when I was in college. I thought it was a little funny. I was definitely adventurous. I loved, and to this day, still love mountain biking and doing all that kind of stuff. I love extreme sports. Loved music and loved art. I was kind of an art major. It's like a weird major at UTD. All that kind of stuff. So that was kind of like how I thought of myself. Those things are what made up who Drew is and Drew's identity. That is how I conceived myself. Time went on and I, came to college, got involved in Focus, there's a long story behind this, was Christian growing up, kind of went away from that in college, came back to it. So the next slide, these kind of things change a little bit. I added in Christian over there. I added in anxious because I figured out I actually have some kind of deals with anxiety. And that's a problem. And I realized that was going on. I started dating Darby. And then I started questioning, am I smart? There's a lot of smart people at college, a lot smarter than I am. And am I so smart as I thought? I started questioning, am I still into mountain biking? Like DFW is very flat. I can't go anywhere. There's no hills. There's no mountains, especially. And am I still like a mountain biker? Is that who I am? I started really questioning that. And I started learning more about what it meant to follow Jesus. And so I grew to start thinking of myself as a disciple. And now I'm not just a churchgoer. I'm not just someone who writes Christian on the form to be marked by the government. But no, I am a disciple. I'm following Jesus. I want to be made in his image. So go to the next slide. So that kind of starts moving towards the center of myself, my identity. And I was like, yeah, this is what it means, right? To have Jesus at the center of my identity. And that didn't really get rid of all this anxiety and all these other things I was dealing with. And I was going through college and then even did the apprenticeship. And during that time, I was realizing how big of a problem anxiety was becoming for me. It was just this kind of ongoing, day in, day out thing, always stressed out, always worried, always just really scared about failing and letting people down. And it became maybe not crippling, but just this weight on my shoulders. It was just kind of ongoing. And so I was talking to my mentors about it, talked to Brandon Worsham, talked to Garrett Davis about it. And I remember in those conversations learning things about how this all plays into identity. Because for me, kind of what I had in my mind was like, okay, the key to solving my anxiety is I just need to become extremely capable. I need to be able to foresee every problem before it happens. I need to be smart enough and talented enough to handle whatever comes up in my life. I need to figure out how to be so socially savvy that I never run into conflict and no one ever dislikes me. And that was, I wouldn't have said that, but that's how I lived to try to deal with my anxiety. Is I was trying to deal with, like, I just gotta like get good enough, and then I can like squish all these problems and I won't be anxious about them anymore. And so I was talking to these guys about it. That was kind of being revealed in those conversations. And with that, I started realizing that was just not actually going to get me very far, right? It was not going to get me far. The solution wasn't competence. The solution was finding my identity in Jesus. And that's what those guys pointed me to. But once again, I'm back to the like, yes, definitely. What does that mean? What does that mean for me to find my identity in Jesus actually? And so I was learning more, and we can go to the next slide. I kind of started thinking, like, this is what it means, right? Like, disciple becomes this huge part of, like, making up a huge part of what I am as a person, who I am as a person. Maybe even if I was, like, really holy, it would start, like, squashing all these other things, and, like, those would just, like, disappear, and the only thing left would be disciple. And so that's kind of, like, what I thought that meant. But then I remember this conversation with Garrett and him kind of sharing about his anxiety, too, and that, for me, was crazy, because I was like, Garrett is, like, extremely confident, extremely talented. I was like, how this guy struggled with anxiety? He's like, yeah, it was before I really believed the gospel. It's before I really understood what it meant for Christ to be the center of my identity. And then he kind of multiple times shared this verse with me about what Jesus says about us. Who are we, and what does Jesus do for us? And it's become this kind of like ongoing thing that's really changed how I think about a lot of this stuff. So it's Romans 8:15-17. It says, the spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Whenever I'm dealing with anxiety, I'm like, oh, I need this. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. By him we cry, Abba, Father. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God, and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. The part that stood out to me is this, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. We are the children of God, heirs and co-heirs with Christ. And that became this bigger and bigger concept for me. I'm like, so that's who I am. Like, at the end of the day, no matter what else happens, that is who I am. I am a son of God. I'm a son of the Most High King. And it's just a crazy concept to think about. And I can call God my Abba, my Father. And so I kind of learned more about it, and I settled, this is the closest rendition to what I think I've settled on, like, this is what identity looks like. So, go to the next slide. So, in the middle now is beloved Son of God, and that's me. And that is all that's in the middle. It's just beloved Son of God. And you could replace that with a lot of different words. You could replace it with disciple. You could replace it with, more than a conqueror. You could replace it with, a lot of these things about, like, whatever Christ kind of says about us. That's kind of somewhat interchangeable, but I really resonate with beloved Son of God. And those other things, instead of them disappearing, they kind of just got pushed to where now those are still a part of me. Those are some qualities that I have, but they aren't me. Like, at the end of the day, those aren't me. They aren't the core of who I am. They don't define me as a person. They're qualities that I have. They're things about me. They're even, you could expand what's kind of outside of that to a lot of other stuff. You could think about my culture. You could think about, like, things that have happened to me and things that I'm interested in, all that kind of stuff. But all that is now outside of this core self of, like, this is who I am. this unchanging middle ground kind of thing. And so I realized with that, kind of what Starak was talking about at Winter Retreat, is when you find your identity in Christ, you really do find it. Because now these things don't get just squashed and kicked out. Now you get to discover these things with Jesus. If anything, the things on the outside, some of them shrink because he says, no, that's not who you are. That's not a part of who you are. That doesn't need to be a part or even a quality of who you are. And then other ones expand, and he helps you grow them and change and mature in them. And then some of them I just didn't even know before really switching to this new diagram. He helped me find things out about myself. He helped me redefine who I was in some ways. Now I'm servant-hearted. Now I'm generous, right? These are things that I need to identify as and have as part of my qualities. But at the center of who I am, even beyond those things, once again, it's still just that I am the beloved Son of God. And so I was, really growing and all this kind of stuff. And I think I was just finding out that, this is so freeing because now I can really explore these things like Sirach was talking about. But nothing is going to replace that middle beloved Son of Abba Father. Because before, when stuff came up, when I was like, I moved to college, am I smart, am I not? That would shake me to my core, right? Because it would be like, if I'm not smart, who am I? And if I'm not someone who really likes mountain biking, who am I? And these other things would really bother me. And those things, instead of being my core that would really shake me if they moved and changed and all that kind of stuff, now those just became qualities to discover, not an identity to protect. Became qualities to discover, not an identity to protect. Because if we're being honest, sometimes we really like those things. We want them to be in the middle. Like I wanted smart to be in the middle because I felt it made me feel better. Like it made me feel good. It made me feel prideful. It made me feel, smarter than other people and stuff. It made me feel good. And I didn't want to let go of that. But if I did, and I think still working on it, this is a lifelong process. But with that, now actually I can delight that that's still an aspect of who I am. It's still a quality of mine. But it's much, much harder to be prideful about it. Because now it's a gift of God. It's not just my identity. It's not who I am. It's just a gift from the Lord. It's not something that defines me or that I can take pride in on its own. The thing I can take pride in is that I'm a son or daughter of God for you guys. And so with that, it's also very freeing for other things, right? For me, for the anxiety stuff, that was so freeing to be like, I'm not. I think in our modern society, we're just really into labels. Like, I'm an anxious person. I'm a this person, blah, 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 whatever it is. And it's so easy to make that kind of who you are. I'm an anxious person. You're telling yourself, you're feeling anxiety. You're like, I'm an anxious person. Or I'm a depressed person. Or I'm a person who struggles with blank thing. And it's so freeing to have that kind of moved out. Because now, I'm not that anymore. I'm a disciple. I am a beloved son of the Most High who, sometimes deals with anxiety. But that's not who I am at the core. I'm no longer, the person that this horrible thing happened to or that horrible thing happened to. I'm also no longer just this person who did that horrible thing or did this other horrible thing. That's not who I am anymore. It's not at the center. And so, I'm no longer just a guy who's into biking. Instead, I'm someone Jesus delights in. I still like biking. It's still part of me, but it's not at my core. I'm no longer just the kid who got addicted to porn. I'm a beloved child of God. I'm no longer the person who has anxiety. I'm a beloved child of God. So the question is, what is it for you? What's your kind of sentence, right? I'm no longer the person who blank. I'm blank. And so I want you guys to actually think about that for just a second. Take 30 seconds, maybe write it down once you have it. But I want you to think about that. What has Jesus done for you? I'm no longer blank. Now I'm blank. And you can kind of fill those in with what you think. And I encourage you to really pray about this and think, what is that second blank to? What really resonates with me? So I'll give you 30 seconds for that. Okay, I'll encourage you to, keep thinking about that, keep praying about that. It's been a powerful thing for me. Also be praying for me. I had the flu last week and I still have a cough, and let's hope we can make it through without just me losing it. When you read the Gospel of John, you encounter over and over that one of the disciples is just named disciple Jesus loved. If you do the math, you kind of quickly figure out who that is. It's John, the writer of the gospel, right? That's how he's referring to himself in his own kind of gospel that he wrote. So he refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. And I used to read that and be so confused and kind of like, that's just so weird and like prideful. Just be like, I'm the disciple of Jesus loved. Like, he's Matthew, but I'm a disciple of Jesus loved. And so I was like, what is with that? That just seems so weird and out of place. And then I think, with some of this stuff, I've been realizing, like, what if for John, why he says that is because that is the most important thing about John for him. That's more important than his name. He doesn't even care that his name's in the gospel. He doesn't even want his name in the gospel. What he wants is what is actually more true than even his own name, which is that he is a disciple that Jesus loved. Doesn't mean that Jesus didn't love other people too. That means that is how John thinks about himself. He thinks about himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. Which part? I'm like, that's like all of it. That's for John, that is who he was. He was the disciple who Jesus loved. That is the core of who he was, even more than his name. And later, John in his life has a vision from Jesus. And in that vision, he hears Jesus say this: "Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it." It's out of Revelation 2:17. It says Jesus is going to give us a new name written specifically to us and known only to the one that receives it. Jesus is the only one who can shape our identity and even the very name that we can call ourselves. In Exodus, Moses is on this journey to get the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and he encounters God in the burning bush. And he's worried that when he goes and tells the Israelites, like, hey, God told me to get you out, that they're going to be like, who's this God? Like, what's his name? So he tells God, like, what do I tell them? And this is God's answer to him. God tells Moses to tell them that the I am who I am has sent him. I am who I am. That's where we get the name Yahweh. We sing all these songs about Yahweh. That's what Yahweh is. I am who I am. Or I will be who I will be. That Hebrews kind of goes back and forth. But I am who I am. And that's, in our English Bibles, that's where we get Lord all caps. If you ever see that in the Old Testament, that's what that is. It's Yahweh, I am who I am. So this is the name that God calls himself. But as children, we're made in the image of God, right? That's the whole beginning to this series. We're made in the image of God. And I think it's very poetic that we learn later in the story that who we are is I am who Jesus says I am. God is I am who I am. And then when I think about myself, I am who Jesus says I am. We mirror him in that. And in a really weird way, it's kind of hard to say without sounding crazy, my identity isn't only who Christ tells me that I am also to be Christ, right? It's not like the Messiah part of it, but that I am supposed to become like Christ. That's the whole goal of the sanctification process. We're being made into the image of Christ. We're going to be like Christ if he lived in our life and was in my body and, for you guys went to your classes and did that. What would Christ do? We're supposed to be and embody what Christ is like in your life and my life. That's the goal of being a disciple. In Galatians 2:20, it says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So we are supposed to be like Jesus. And so in a weird way, we're supposed to just embody him in all these ways. And that's the empowering of the Spirit, right, is what helps us to do that. But by being like Jesus, I get to learn how to actually reflect God how I'm supposed to, instead of reflecting my idols. Because Jesus reflects God, but does so perfectly. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. That's Colossians 1:15. A son is the image of the invisible God. We said at the beginning of this series and keep talking about it all the way through that we are made to reflect God, that humans are made to reflect. That's the whole kind of deal. The problem is we start worshiping other things and we start reflecting those other things that we worship. So just as we were made to reflect God, Jesus is the person who is finally for us, perfectly made in the image of God. And he perfectly reflects God. He's finally the image bearer that doesn't end up reflecting our distorted image. He gives us the clear and perfect image of God. He took up our humanity and restored its glory to be a reflection of God. And Jesus was this true image in contrast to the false idol that we see all across the Bible. So we're finally able to actually reflect God when we base our identity in Jesus and not in all these other things. That's when we're finally able to start reflecting God. And this whole, reversal we've seen, this whole story, this whole sermon series, where we're supposed to reflect God, and then we've messed it up, and we're reflecting all these other things. In Jesus, we finally see someone who reflects God, and then in him, we're finally also able to do the same. And so something I've noticed is that when we operate off of the old diagram, those things in the middle there have a habit of becoming our idols. So you can go kind of back. Really, just one slide would be enough. Maybe two. It would be easier to read. Those things become our idols, Even anxiety can become an idol. My love of music becomes an idol. Biking becomes an idol. Being artistic becomes an idol. Being smart becomes an idol. All that kind of stuff can become an idol for us. And we've talked throughout this whole series, idols shape our identity because we start reflecting them. But also, if something becomes part of our identity, it can very quickly become an idol for us. What I place my identity in can become an idol. For a while, I'm telling you, I was into biking. That was my bread and butter every single day of my life growing up. How some people are really into football or band or whatever growing up. Mine was biking. And that was my whole thing, and it became this idol for me. But then as I grew up, those idols kind of shifted and changed, and now I started idolizing being capable, right? It's trying to get over that anxiety again. I idolize being capable and being sufficient on my own. I idolize being loved and being liked. I idolize being respected. And we said it before, idols make terrible masters. They enslave us and they turn us into their image. And what Jesus does is he breaks us free from that cycle. He breaks us free from the bondage of idols. Romans 8:29 says, "For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." To be conformed to the image of the Son. Instead of imaging the idols we've made that are deaf and mute, we are to image Jesus, who is in turn the perfect image of God and full of light and love and mercy and grace. And this isn't just this theological truth that we just wrap our heads around. We see Jesus actually presenting us the model of what that looks like daily to break the power of those idols. And Jesus lived his life in perfect submission to the Father. Instead of bowing down to what the idols would demand of him, he lived for the Father's will instead. Jesus gave this answer in John 5. He says, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does." Jesus mirrors the Father perfectly, and through that, it breaks those powers of the idols. And I'm intentionally saying breaks the power of idols, because as we see throughout the series, they really do enslave us. They have this power over us, instead of us having power over them. So maybe it's the idol of being loved, right? I'm enslaved by the idol of being loved, because then I'm trying to choose all of my actions in a way that's going to make people love me and for me to never upset them. And in Jesus, I'm free to not worry about people loving me, since I'm already loved. Instead, I can worry about going and loving people. What about the idol of being respected? I become enslaved by feeling I can never look weak. I have to be respected. People have to look up to me. In Jesus, it's made clear that his power is made perfect in my weakness. I'm free to fail. I'm free to find honor and respect in humility, not in pride. It's an idol of just being cool. It's silly, but it's true. So many of us just want to be cool. We become enslaved out of a fear that if I'm not cool enough, then I won't fit in and people won't like me. And Jesus frees us from that and tells us that we can be a fool for God, not cool for God. It's the idol of just being wealthy, the idol of money. I become enslaved to it because I start making all my financial decisions that make sense for me. And Jesus frees us to make financial decisions that make sense for others and for the kingdom. Money doesn't rule over me anymore. I rule over money. When I have it, I can use it for loving others. And when I don't have it, I can trust the Father to take care of me. There's the idol of being smart. I become enslaved, and I try not to make mistakes and always have the right answers to everything. And Jesus frees me to know that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. There's the idol, this one's really big nowadays, the idol of being significant. I become enslaved by trying to prove my own worth. I try to stand out and make a difference, and not out of love for other people, but out of a fear that I won't matter if I don't. It won't matter if I don't make a difference, if I don't stand out. And Jesus frees us by saying that I deeply matter, even if I don't accomplish another thing the rest of my life. I still deeply matter. And we could go on. I hope you see how Jesus reframes these idols and transforms them. Idols are all about getting what we want, and we make God into our image to make us more comfortable. We try to shape God into what we want so that it doesn't poke us and prod us. And then we worship these different things to get our desires. So demolishing these idols and instead worshiping God and submitting our will to His frees us up. We're not shackled by those things anymore and inward turned anymore. We become freed up to be outwardly turned now. And idols represent this attempt to find significance and security by the work of one's own hands. And by contrast, Jesus is the one whose significance and security from the beginning to the end are found not in the work of His hands, but in sacrificing His life for others. And we see this most clearly on the cross. We see it in the garden before He goes to the cross. We see Him lay down any attempt at security or safety that could be had by idols. Idols are about trying to get our will done. That's what the Israelites were doing in the Old Testament, right? They're not just turning to them because they look cool. They're turning to them because they're like, my crops are dying. There's a famine, there's a drought, there's no rain. And the nations surrounding them say, well, if you make an idol of Baal and you bow down to it and worship it and do all these things, then Baal will make it rain for you. And so they go, okay, yes, I got to do that because that is what I need. Idols were a way of getting what we wanted instead of trusting in the Lord. And so in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus, we see Him deny this way of life when He says, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. He wasn't about living the life of always getting what He wants. He was about laying down His life for what the Father wants. The question is that true of us as well? Is the deep hope of my heart that God's will lines up with my will? Or is it that my will would line up with God's will? As in, do I hope that God approves of my plans and dreams and actions? Or do I hope that I won't ever make any plans outside of God's will? That I won't ever dream dreams that aren't also what God dreams? That I won't take actions that God also wouldn't take? Is that what I hope and what I want? That my will will be transformed to be in perfect submission to the Father's? Or do I just hope that God will submit to my will by maybe doing different things and praying in different ways, and if I fast long enough, maybe He'll do my will instead? No, do we want to be transformed that our will looks like His will? Hopefully it's the former, also often it's the latter. That's why we have to keep running back to Jesus for our example, to ask Him for help and how we can do this. And everything we've talked about tonight just does not happen overnight, and I get that. We can't just hear a sermon and just have it down. I certainly didn't. I certainly don't. Basing our identity on Jesus and having Him demolish our idols just takes a whole lifetime. But we can start that process right now. We can decide to renew our minds. We can decide to renew the way that we think about ourselves in the world. So I'm going to invite the worship team back up. And as they're coming up here, I just want us to think about this. Let's think about if we grew in this, what would happen? Imagine the type of community that would form if people have actually internalized all of this. Imagine how many arguments and fights would just die on our tongues because we know our value doesn't come from what that person thinks about us, or if they agree with us or not. Imagine how much we could go out and actually truly deeply love people because we're not scared of what they think. Imagine the amount of anxiety and worry that would just plummet if we really did this. So that's my prayer for us as a community, that we can start embodying this. I'm going to pray, and the worship team can kind of start. Lord, this is really hard. This is hard. Idols and our identity just get so rooted deeply in us, and we ask you to just shake that up, to start tonight in our lives and really completely renew our minds, renew the way that we think about ourselves, and renew the way that we act and how we love people and how we interact with you. Let us learn to submit our will to yours, not the other way around. In Jesus' name, amen.